Wyoming Territory, late autumn of 1872. The wind cut low across the high plains, and when Owen Statham stepped into his barn before dawn, he was not expecting to find a woman huddled in the straw, sobbing like the world had fallen in on her. She flinched at the creak of the door. Her dark hair was tangled, her dress torn at the hem and dusted in dried blood and dirt. She looked up, eyes swollen from crying, and pointed one shaking hand to her rounded belly. "Please," she said, voice cracking, "please save our child." Owen froze mid-step. He had seen death, loss, and desperation before, but the raw fear in her voice knocked the air clean out of his lungs. "My name is Owen," he said, kneeling slow, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're safe here. What's your name?" "Tessa," she whispered. "Tessa Garner." He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She was cold, ice cold, but her skin burned under his touch. "How far along are you?" 7 months, she said. "Maybe more. I do not know exactly," he nodded. "You hurt anywhere?" "Just tired. Been walking for days." "I had to get away." Owen helped her sit up against a bale of hay. "All right, you sit here. I will get you water and something to eat." She clutched his wrist. "Do you have a doctor nearby?" "No doctor. Closest one's in Cheyenne, 2 days' ride, but I know how to help." "I delivered calves, colts, even helped a neighbor's wife once when her man got thrown and broke his leg. I can keep you steady." Tessa nodded, tears still sliding down her cheeks as she let go of his wrist. Owen moved fast. He brought her water, a blanket, and biscuits left from supper. He avoided questions for now. She ate like she had not seen food in days. Her hands shook around the tin cup. She fell asleep curled in the hay, Owen's coat pulled tight around her. He watched her from the barn door, arms folded, heart pounding harder than it had in years. Something about the way she had looked at him, like he was the last bit of solid ground in a world turned upside down. By morning, she had a little more color. He made her eggs over the fire inside the cabin and poured her a cup of coffee. "You sure about coffee?" he asked, eyeing her belly. She nodded, smiling faintly. "I need the warmth." "Fair enough." He waited until she had eaten to speak again. "You said you were getting away from who?" Her smile vanished. She set the tin cup down, hands trembling again. "My husband," she said. "He is dead now. But the man he owed money to, Jude Mercer, he wanted to claim me as payment. Said the baby was his by right. I would not let him. I ran." Owen's jaw tightened. "He follow you?" "I do not think so. I stayed off the road." "How far were you planning to go?" "I did not know. I just kept moving." Owen leaned back, watching her. "You made it here. That counts for a lot." Tessa gave him a shaky smile, brushing hair from her face. "I did not expect kindness." "You will get it here," Owen said. "You and the little one both." She reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you." Her fingers were small, but her grip was firm. Something passed between them, something quiet but sure. Over the next few days, Tessa stayed in the cabin while Owen worked the land. She helped where she could, peeling potatoes, stitching a torn shirt sleeve, brushing down the horses when her back allowed. She never complained, even when her ankles swelled or her breath shortened from walking across the yard. One afternoon, he found her sitting on the porch, her hands folded over her belly, watching the sun dip toward the hills. "You all right?" he asked, sitting beside her. Tessa nodded. "The baby kicks more when I am near the horses." "Like it knows." "Then it is going to be strong," Owen said, smiling. She looked at him, the wind tugging strands of hair across her face. "You used to have someone. My wife passed 3 winters back. Fever. We tried for children but never had any." "I am sorry," she said softly. He nodded. "Thank you." Silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Then she asked, "Why did you not turn me away?" "I saw your face," he said simply. "You looked like you had no one left. I know that feeling." She blinked fast, eyes wet again, but she did not cry. Instead, she reached over and took his hand. That night, a storm rolled in snow and wind pounding against the walls. Owen stoked the fire and moved a cot near the hearth for her. She could not make it back to the barn, and he would not have let her even if she tried. As the wind howled outside, she woke with a sharp cry. Owen was at her side in seconds. "It hurts," she gasped. "It is too early." He helped her sit up, checked her breathing, her pulse. Could just be false labor, but we will be ready just in case. She clutched his arm, eyes wide. I cannot lose this baby, Owen. I have nothing else left. You will not lose it, he said. I am here. I will not let anything happen to either of you. She stared at him, eyes searching his. I believe you, she whispered. Hours passed. The pain dulled, then faded. She finally slept again, and Owen stayed beside her, one hand resting near hers, just close enough to feel her warmth. Come morning, the storm had passed. The world outside was white and still, but inside the cabin something had shifted. She looked at him differently now. There was hope in her eyes, and he felt it too in how his heart beat faster when she laughed, how he checked for her first before heading out, how she had filled the cabin without even trying. Spring was still months away, but Owen felt it as sure as the wind something was blooming. Something real. And it had started the moment she looked up at him in that barn, pointed to her belly and said, "Please save our child." By the end of the second week, the snow had crusted over the fields and the mare was heavy with foal. Owen kept his hands busy mending the fence line near the creek bed, the cold biting into his knuckles as he worked. But his mind stayed fixed on the woman inside the cabin who hummed while she knit baby socks from leftover wool. He came in at dusk, boots thick with mud, and found her standing near the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, cheeks pink from the heat. The scent of rabbit stew filled the air, and beside the hearth, the cradle he'd carved years ago, once tucked away in the loft, never used, sat freshly dusted, a faded patchwork quilt folded neatly inside. "I hope it's all right," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "It felt better to do something with my hands." "You did more than all right," Owen said, shrugging out of his coat. "I'd nearly forgot I still had that cradle." She stirred the pot, quiet for a moment. "You built it with care." "I could tell. I hoped I'd need it someday." He stepped closer, leaned one hand on the table. "Never did." Tessa looked up, her eyes steady now. "You do now." They didn't speak after that for a while, just the soft clatter of spoons and bowls, the wind sighing against the logs, but something had shifted. Not sudden, just sure. Later, while she sat near the fire, rubbing her feet, Owen brought out a folded envelope from the drawer by the hearth. "You got folks anywhere?" he asked, handing it to her. She read the address slowly, then looked up. "My older sister married a schoolteacher in Helena. We haven't spoken since I left Missouri. She didn't approve of my husband. Would you want her to know you're safe?" I don't know if she'd answer. She ran her thumb along the edge. "But maybe," he nodded. "If you write, I'll see it posted with the spring mail. No rush." "Just thought you ought to have the choice." She set the envelope on the table, fingers lingering. "Thank you for thinking of it." The lantern flickered low. She leaned back and closed her eyes, and he watched her chest rise and fall, slow and even. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself until that moment, waiting for her to collapse, for signs of fever or fear. But she stayed steady. That night, he sat by the window with his ledger open. The winter feed was running thin, and he'd need to trade for flour and salt before the next storm. He didn't hear her until she came to stand beside him, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You should sleep," she said quietly. "I will." He shut the book. "Just making lists." She hesitated, then said, "My husband never wrote anything down, said it was foolish to plan when the world never listened." "Maybe so," Owen said, "but I'd rather be foolish and fed." She smiled, then looked down at his hands. "Your knuckles are cracked. Fence posts don't set themselves." She reached for the tin of salve near the stove and unscrewed the lid. "Let me." He didn't argue. Her fingers were gentle but certain, working the ointment along his skin. He watched her face, calm, focused, and felt something stir in his chest that hadn't moved in years. Not just want, not just kindness returned, something deeper. Something that asked for permanence. She capped the tin and pressed it back into his palm. "You should wear gloves. I'll remember next time." She hesitated, then turned to go. "Tessa," she paused in the doorway, looking back, "if there's ever anything you want changed, anything I've done that makes you uneasy." "There isn't," she said. I feel more myself here than I have in years." The door closed behind her, and Owen sat long after the fire died down. He didn't need to ask what she meant. He felt it too in the way the house held warmth now, not just heat. In the way silence no longer felt like loss. The next morning, while he hitched the sled to the mule, she joined him, wrapped in a shawl, her boots laced tight. "You're not coming," he said. "It's too far, roads are ice." "I'm not fragile," she said, chin lifting. "I want to see the land." "I've only seen it through a window." He studied her face, then handed her a second scarf. "All right, but if you slip on the ice, I'm carrying you back myself," she grinned. "Deal." They rode out past the ridge, the wind sharp, the sun pale over the hills. She asked about the rock formations, the cattle grazing low in the valley, the burnt-out wagon they passed near the timberline. "Fire took it last spring," Owen said. "No one hurt. The family made it down to Fort Laramie." She nodded, quiet again. By the time they reached the trading post, her cheeks were raw with wind, but her eyes were bright. She helped him barter for cornmeal and beans, choosing a length of blue calico for the baby without asking. When he raised a brow, she shrugged. "It'll be a girl," she said. "I can feel it." He didn't argue. He liked the sound of her certainty. On the ride back, the mule slowed as snow began to fall again. She leaned into his coat, her head against his shoulder. "I thought I'd never feel safe again," she murmured. "You are," he said. "You're safe now." And in the hush that followed, with snow gathering in the folds of her shawl and the land rolling wide beneath them, he realized he'd stopped thinking of her as someone passing through. She was home now, same as him. The days turned longer by minutes, though the snow still held tight to the hills. When the wind died down, Owen would take Tessa to walk the edge of the pasture, hand beneath her elbow, boots crunching through crusted drifts. She didn't speak much on those walks, but her eyes stayed watchful, always moving over the fence rails, the tree line, the sky. Like she was still learning how to breathe without fear. One morning, Owen came in from the barn with a trace of hay in his hair and a strip of red cloth in his hand. "Found this tangled in the gate latch," he said, laying it on the table. "Not mine." Tessa stepped closer and picked it up, the color drained from her face. "Mercer's men wore red bands on their arms," she said, "to mark who belonged." Owen's stomach tightened. "You're sure?" She nodded once. He folded the cloth and tucked it into the stove, pressing the iron door shut with more force than needed. Smoke curled through the grate and vanished. "They didn't come to knock," she said quietly. "No, they came to watch." That night, he moved his rifle from the wall to the edge of the hearth. Tessa didn't ask questions, and he didn't offer reassurances. The next morning, he shifted the horses to the back paddock and began sawing boards for a second latch on the cabin door. As he worked, she stood nearby with a basket of root vegetables, brushing dirt from turnips with the edge of her apron. "Do you think he'll come himself?" she asked. "If he thinks he's owed something, he might," her jaw set. "He's not. I know." She looked at the hammer in his hand, the scar just above his knuckle. "You ever had to shoot a man?" "Yes." "Would you again?" "For you," Owen said. "I'd do what needed doing." She didn't flinch, only nodded once and went back to the turnips. That evening, she brought out a small tin box from her satchel. "I have something," she said, opening the lid. "My mother's wedding ring. It's the only thing I kept when I ran." Inside, nestled in a scrap of linen, lay a simple gold band, dulled and worn thin on one side. "She wore it 43 years, Tessa said. "I was going to trade it if things got bad." Owen looked at her. "You still might need it," she shook her head. "I want to give it to her, the baby, when she's grown." He reached out and closed the box gently. "Then we'll keep it safe." She didn't speak again until the fire had gone low. "I think she'll have your eyes," she said softly. "Not his, not mine, yours." Owen didn't answer. He couldn't. But something in his chest broke open at the words quiet and sure, like she'd already decided the child belonged to both of them. A week passed. No more cloth, no tracks at the edge of the property. But the unease lingered like smoke, thin and constant. One morning while splitting wood, Owen saw a lone rider crest the ridge, then pull his horse short and turn back without coming near. He didn't mention it to Tessa. Just cleaned his rifle that night slower than usual. The next day she asked him to teach her to shoot. "I won't need it," she said. "But I want to know how." They walked to the edge of the pasture where an old cedar stump gave them a mark. He let her hold the pistol first, showing her the weight of it, how it kicked. "It's not about being fast," he said. "It's about being steady." She fired once, the shot going wide. Again, closer. By the fourth, she hit bark. "That one counts," Owen said. She smiled, breath visible in the cold. "I never held one before, you did fine." That night, she added more salt to the stew and hummed a melody he didn't recognize. When he asked, she said, "My mother sang it when it stormed, said it kept the roof from falling in." Did it work? Every time. The first thaw came late, but when it did, the earth softened fast. Water pooled along the furrows, and the mare birthed her foal just after dawn, a pale gray colt with knobby legs and wide eyes. Tessa insisted on seeing him, leaning on Owen's arm as they crossed the muddy yard. "He's taller than I expected," she said. "He'll be strong." She brushed a finger down the colt's neck. "So will she." That night, as the sky burned low with stars, she stood by the window, hand pressed to the curve of her belly. "I used to think the world was small," she said, "like a room you couldn't leave. Now it feels wide again." Owen stepped beside her, his gaze on the dark stretch of land beyond the fence. "It is wide," he said, "but not empty." She turned to face him, her eyes steady. "I'm not afraid anymore." He reached up, thumb brushing her cheek, and she leaned into his palm without hesitation. "You don't have to be," he said. And that night, when she reached for his hand beneath the quilt and laced her fingers through his, neither of them said anything. There was nothing left to explain. The wind outside had quieted. The walls held strong, and two hearts that had once lived in separate silences now beat in the same warm dark. Tessa woke with a tightness low in her back and a strange stillness in her belly. The cabin was dim, early light just beginning to catch the frost along the window glass. Owen was at the stove, stirring cornmeal into a pot, his shoulders hunched slightly against the morning chill. She sat up slowly, pressing her hand to her side. The baby, usually restless at dawn, was quiet. "I think it's time," she said. Owen looked up. His eyes held none of the panic she'd once feared from men, just a deep, quiet readiness. He didn't ask questions. He set the spoon aside and crossed to her, crouching down beside the cot. "Let's get you by the fire," he said. By mid-morning, the pains had settled into a rhythm, not sharp, but steady enough that she could feel the weight of each one like slow waves pushing her toward something she couldn't see yet. Owen laid thick blankets near the hearth, boiled water, and set a pot of mint leaves on to steep. She said little, conserving her strength, but when he brought her a damp cloth for her brow, she caught his hand. "You're not afraid?" she asked. He met her gaze. "I've never been more sure of anything." She nodded, her breath catching as another tightening gripped her. He steadied her shoulders, his grip firm without pressing. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing pine branches against the roof. A hawk circled high above the pasture, its cry distant but clear. The world beyond the cabin continued, unaware of the small life preparing to enter it. Hours passed. The sun crawled across the floorboards, then vanished behind thick gray clouds. Tessa gritted her teeth through the worst of it, sweat beading along her collar despite the cold in the air. Owen never left her side. When she grew restless, he helped her shift positions. When her hands shook, he held them steady. "I don't think I can," she whispered once, her voice barely more than breath. "You already are," he said. Then, just as dusk fell, the cry came, sharp, strong, and unlike anything she'd ever heard. Her arms trembled as she reached for the child, slick and red and squalling. Owen wrapped the baby in the soft flannel he'd warmed by the fire and placed her gently in Tessa's arms. The baby quieted almost at once, rooting blindly, her face round and flushed. "She's perfect," Tessa said, her voice ragged with disbelief. Owen knelt beside her, one hand resting lightly on the child's back. "She's here. Just like you said she would be." Tessa looked at him then, really looked as if seeing not just the man who had taken her in, but the man who had stayed through every moment without once turning away. "I don't want to go to Helena," she said. He didn't answer at first, just adjusted the blanket around the baby's feet. "You don't have to," he said finally. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyelids heavy. "I want her to grow up where things start honest." "She will," he said. "Right here." The lamp burned low beside them. The baby slept between them, her tiny chest rising and falling. Outside, the first snowmelt trickled off the eaves. When Tessa woke again, the room was quiet except for the fire's low crackle. Owen was asleep in the chair, one hand resting on the cradle's edge. She watched him for a long time, her heart full with something steadier than hope, something earned. In the morning, she gave the baby a name, not her mother's, not her own. A new name for this new place. And when she asked Owen to hold her daughter, he did so without hesitation, his arms cradling her like he'd been waiting for that moment all his life. Tessa watched the two of them together, her hand pressed to her side where the ache had finally eased. She didn't say it out loud, not yet, but she knew it now, beyond doubt. She had found home. Not when she arrived at the ranch, not even when the child was placed in her arms, but here, in this moment, watching the man who had asked for nothing give everything. It was the beginning of their life. And they both knew it. The days turned soft and wet as spring took hold. Meltwater fed the narrow stream past the pasture, and the ground, once frozen hard, gave way beneath Owen's boots as he walked the fields. The colt nosed at clumps of grass, still unsure of his legs, and the cabin filled with the low, steady music of a child's breathing. Tessa moved slower now, not from pain but from care. The baby Clara they'd settled on was bright-eyed and always hungry. Tessa held her with a quiet confidence that had deepened since the birth, as though she'd stepped into herself fully, no longer shadowed by what had come before. One afternoon, as Owen chopped kindling near the shed, he heard the wagon before he saw it, a distant creak of wheels, uneven and slow. He stood still, axe lowered, breath caught tight in his chest. It wasn't common for strangers to come this far this early in the season. Tessa met him on the porch, Clara bundled against her shoulder. Her face was calm, but she didn't speak. The wagon appeared around the bend near the cottonwoods, drawn by a swayback mare and driven by an older man wrapped in a brown duster. A younger woman sat beside him, her bonnet tilted back, hair loose around her ears. They stopped a good 20 yards out. The man stayed seated, hat in hand. "I'm looking for a Tessa Garner," he called, voice worn with travel. Tessa stepped down, her free hand resting against the porch post. "Who are you?" The man nodded toward the woman beside him. "Your sister sent us. Our names are Emery and Ruth Farrow. She got your letter." Tessa didn't move. "I sent it 3 months ago." She was in Helena when it arrived, had to wait for the thaw to send reply. She wanted to come herself, but her youngest took sick with the measles. Sent us instead. Said you might need kin. Tessa's grip on Clara didn't change, but her eyes did, widening, not with fear but disbelief. "She said you'd likely be too proud to ask for help," Ruth added gently, "but she hoped you wouldn't turn it away." Owen stepped forward, hands loose at his sides. "No one here's turning away anything." They stayed 3 nights. Ruth helped with feed chores and sang to Clara in a low, lilting voice that reminded Tessa of Missouri summers. Emery mended the broken axle on their wagon and traded 2 sacks of oats for a cured ham Owen had put up in the smokehouse. The morning they left, Ruth pressed a folded letter into Tessa's palm. "From Miriam, read it when you're ready." "I didn't think she'd forgive me," Tessa said. "Sometimes it takes time to remember where love started," Ruth said. But it was always there. Owen watched from the fence line as the wagon rolled out. Tessa stood beside him, Clara nestled against her chest, the letter unopened in her apron pocket. "I'm not going back," she said. "I didn't ask you to. I didn't mean Helena. I meant the part of me that used to flinch at kindness." Owen turned to her. "You don't have to explain." "I want to," she said, "because I love you." Her voice didn't shake, it didn't need to. The words settled between them like roots. He touched her cheek, rough thumb brushing the soft skin beneath her eye. "I've loved you longer than you've known." They didn't say more. They didn't have to. That summer, Owen cleared the northeast corner of the pasture and laid stones for a garden bed. Tessa planted beans, root vegetables, and a row of blue corn she'd bartered for with Ruth. Clara watched from a sling on her mother's back, gumming her fist and reaching occasionally for the sun. They married in early June, beneath the same cottonwoods where the wagon had first appeared. A traveling preacher passed through on his way to Fort Fetterman and agreed to stop long enough for the vows. It was a simple ceremony, no lace, no crowd, just the two of them, hands clasped, Clara cooing softly in Ruth's arms. Afterward, Owen placed a silver band on Tessa's finger, one he'd bought years ago in Cheyenne and never had reason to give. "I kept it," he said, "in case life surprised me." Tessa kissed him then, slow and certain, the sun warm across her shoulders, wide sky open above them. Ruth and Emery returned in autumn, bringing letters from Helena and jars of summer preserves. They stayed through harvest, helping bring in the last of the corn and teaching Clara to say horse and hat with equal seriousness. By then, Tessa had built a small cradle garden behind the cabin, full of late flowers and herbs. She kept her mother's ring in a box beside the bed, tucked in linen, waiting for the day Clara would be old enough to ask about it. Owen repaired the roof before the first snow and taught Clara to ride with her tiny fists gripping his collar as he led the mare in slow circles. The cabin stayed warm through the winter, not because of the stove, but because there was laughter now. Small things, a shared glance over supper, hands brushing while washing dishes. Clara's delighted squeals when Owen lifted her high enough to touch the ceiling beam. They built a life not from what had been taken, but from what they chose each day to give. And when spring came again, soft and slow, with wildflowers blooming along the edge of the pasture, Tessa laid her head on Owen's chest one evening and said, "Everything I thought I lost, I found here." He kissed her forehead and whispered, "You were never lost. Just waiting to be known." They stayed that way, with Clara asleep in her cradle, the fire low and the world outside quiet and whole, and they never left, not the land, not each other, not the love that had grown between them with the same quiet strength as the roots beneath their home.